Hey everyone, this is Louis7 and I thought it'd be interesting to do a video of my top 3 classes in Lord of the Rings Online. In this video I'll be explaining my 3 favorite classes overall, at least right now. So the gameplay in the background will be of whatever class I'm going over at the time. And I thought it'd be good to start backwards and do my 3rd favorite class to start with, which is the Captain. And I am actually surprised it's the Captain because they're a pretty slow class, but I think what I like most about Captain that made it make the list is that they can perform all 3 roles in pretty much every content I do. On my Captain I'll mostly do landscape content, and featured instances is what I mostly do. So they can perform all 3 roles like I said for what I do. And with tanking they can main tank everything, every featured instance, that's fine. Usually the 12-man's another tank's always a good idea, but they definitely can main tank that. They have good survivability on their own, they have some self-heals and good cool, and of course they have their big AoE forced attack taunt, which is good for aggro, and some other stuff that's good for aggro. And then they do have their buffs, which buff the Fellowship defensively, which can be good for the rest of the Fellowship, which is often what a captain's look for their buffing. So they're good in tank line on that. And then the next line is the healing line I want to go over. I think this is the most fun spec for Captain because I think healing on a Captain's really fun. I like that it feels different than all the other healing because you're using melee combat to heal, and most of your active healing actually comes from using melee abilities, and those melee abilities also buff your allies, so overall provides good healing just from melee. And of course you have your marks and some other heals in your Fellowship heals, and those are always useful. But I think just the overall playstyle of the melee healing, like I've said, is overall just fun to me. And that's why I think I like that spec the most. And then the last spec is, of course, DPS, what most captains are looked for because of their huge damage buffs and a couple debuffs that are good for their Fellowships. Overall, the red line provides a lot of damage to the Fellowship through buffs, like the banner, some cooldowns, and stuff like that. And then they also have some more active buffs that they use in regular rotation that can stay on. Overall, DPS is just a good asset to the Fellowship. I don't dislike it, I just like healing more, but Redline's still pretty fun. The actual damage the Captain does in Redline though is not that much, but even in solo play it's enough that it's not like real bad where I don't want to do it at all. It's definitely still enough to get you through the content. So overall, what I like most about Captain is their versatility and being able to do all 3 roles and adapt to whatever the Fellowship needs, and I like healing the most. If I had to give the Captain a rating, just overall rating 1 through 10, I'd probably give them a 7, because I think they could be a little bit faster playstyle, and that's probably the main thing holding me back from liking them more. Alright, so that's it for the Captain. The next class is pretty close to the top class, but this one sometimes changes, and especially throughout my history of LOTRO has definitely been the top class from time to time. But anyway, this class is the Rune Keeper. The Rune Keeper is what I'd consider the main damage-focused caster, and casters like that are always a class I've been drawn to in any game. Like World of Warcraft, my main character was a mage. So, Rune Keeper was a natural choice for me, and I enjoyed it more than Lore Master when I started playing LOTRO because I just thought it was better and more fun. I enjoy all 3 specs on the Rune Keeper. Since it's a caster, it's not really super fast-paced or slow-paced, but if you do go into the yellow line, it can be pretty fast-paced with instant casts and kiting, so that's a bonus if you don't like casting as much. Anyway, I also like that the Rune Keeper can heal. I think healing on the Rune Keeper is fun as it has a different focus of some of the other healers. Some of the healing's actually a little bit similar to the Captain, and that it's heal over time based, a lot of it, but it's not really the same as Captain if you actually play it. So overall, I do think one of the main draws for Rune Keeper is just being that real strong kind of pure DPS caster ability, while also offering some other utility with the yellow spec, lightning, which doesn't necessarily have real bad DPS, it's just greatly outclassed by fire right now, which that could of course change with some balance changes and Mordor coming up. So I'll go ahead and go through each spec now and see how I like each one. I'll start off with lightning. This used to be my favorite spec. Well, it wasn't really my favorite. This was before the trait trees. I just mainly ended up using lightning skills. The fire ones were just never useful when I was lower level before they even added the trait specs and changed all that with Helm's Deep. So I like that lightning is very mobile and can do high burst damage if it gets any crits. The crits are really high, otherwise the sustain damage isn't too good compared to fire, at least, and some other classes. Overall, it can be really good for solo play if you just keep going through just casting your lightning spells. Instead of fire, you'd be casting, wait a bit, and then they're dead. You could just keep running and killing with lightning. That is if your damage is high enough and you don't have to keep casting your lightning spells. Anyway, in instances it can be useful still on some easier instances where mobs die quicker, where you wouldn't even be able to cast as fire. So that's also another bonus of that spec. So my overall favorite spec would be fire, just because I've always liked fire, and like I said, I like WoW Mage, so I play Fire Mage in that. So this is kind of similar, being Fire Rune Keeper and all. I think fire is really fun right now, and it does have really high damage, which of course helps, but I think I would still like it even if it was lower damage, just because it is fun. In fact, I think if they wanted to nerf Rune Keeper somehow for single target damage, which I kind of hope they don't, but they could add more of their damage into AoE and be more of an explosive fire than a single target fire. But anyway, that's just some thoughts on that. So I think fire is fun overall, and like I said, it does do a lot of damage, and it still doesn't have bad AoE damage, so that's good. And then the last spec is healing, which I do enjoy. It's just outclassed by Minstrel usually, but it's really fun. I like the heal over time aspect, and the bubbles aren't too prevalent as they were as low levels at high level. So I do enjoy the bubble type, but that's not quite as much of a focus at the cap, even though they still are there and still useful. Just not quite as much. But yeah, I enjoy healing and the heal over time aspect that allows you to do some damage while your heals are working. Overall, it might not be as good as Minstrel, but I think it's more fun than Minstrel healing. So that's it for what I think of the Rune Keeper and their specs. And you can probably see why it's sometimes been my favorite, because I do really enjoy fire and just burning things. The Rune Keeper is a fun class with 3 fun specs, and that's another reason it made 2. If I had to rate the Rune Keeper on a 1 through 10 scale like the captain, I think it would get a 9, almost a 10, but it's just not quite 10 because I think the healing could be a little bit better and be made just a little bit more viable, where you would regularly see Rune Keeper healers compete with Minstrel healers for a healing spot, or offer an actually useful alternative to Minstrel healing, to where you would maybe want both. So that'll be it for the Rune Keeper, and the next class here is the Warden. You probably could have guessed this is my favorite, and like I said, sometimes it does change between the Rune Keeper if I'm just not really feeling Warden at the time, but lately it's definitely been my Warden. I just find Warden really fun. The gambit system, it's not slow, it's faster than the captain, maybe not quite as fast as like Bjorning or Burglar. There are some slight annoyances with the Warden, which I'll go over later when I rate it. But overall, it's a very fun class. It has viable tanking, viable damage, and not quite as viable range, but it does have a different ranged option that is different from any other ranged class if you're interested in that. Which I am. I do enjoy the ranged spec for Warden. It's just not really played as often by other Wardens because, again, it's not the best DPS, and even though it seems like it's technically a support line, according to LOTRO, support is not that great. It does have a little bit, but again, not really that good. Okay, so like I've said, I really enjoy the gambit system, and I like the damage over time, the bleed aspect, that part of it, and I kind of like the equipment they wear, spear, javelin, shield. Not quite as heavy as like a guardian shield, but not light like a captain or minstrel. And they wear medium armor. Seems kind of like a sentinel feel to me, I like that. Anyway, I will go over the specs again, like I did the other classes, and I think I will start with the yellow line. I actually enjoy the yellow line. I wish it did more damage and was more viable because it's fun. It's a really different range style than any other class. It has kind of a similar feel to Hunter almost, but the gambit system makes it completely different. Of course, throwing javelins is different than shooting arrows from a bow. But that's kind of more big hit focused than the other specs. Instead of bleed and dot, it does actually have some bleeds when you get more into the yellow line. So yeah, I overall think yellow line's fun, and it gives a good alternative to other range classes, and an alternative to other Warden playstyles that are melee. So the next line I'll do is tank. Tanking as a Warden is really fun, especially in AoE, where you can use Defiant Challenge and almost have 100% mitigation and basically take no damage and have your morale taps up, and yeah, you can just kill a whole bunch of mobs at once like that. And then of course you can self-heal real well and heal your power even, so you can sustain against longer fights and some bosses and tougher single mobs you can sustain against too. The main disadvantage of tanking as a Warden is they're very vulnerable to stuns, and they wear medium armor instead of heavy armor, but that's a 10% mitigation difference, which can definitely make a difference, especially against raid bosses where you aren't as much soloing it as you are tanking for a raid. It's not quite as good as a heavy armor class, but it's still viable. And then probably one of the best aspects for Warden tanking in endgame is how high DPS their tanking is. It's the highest DPS for any tank, which also makes aggro easier. So if you're looking to get stuff done quicker with the tank, Warden's always a good option, and I like that. I like the high damage tanking. It's fun. And then the last line is DPS, which is bleed and dot focused. Bleed and dot, I mean light damage focused, which all of those are dots. Anyway, the game seems to try to sell Redline Recklessness as a sweeping bleed, where you actually go into the spear sweep stuff in the red line, which is not that good. Not really good at all compared to other stuff you can get. But anyway, that's just a little gripe on that, but overall I think the red line's really fun. It's quicker than the blue line and survives not quite as well, but can still survive well solo, so that's good. It's quick damage solo and yeah, high DPS, and it can survive better than some other damage specs even for other classes, which is always good. Yeah, I think the fantasy of bleeds and the damage over time is a good drawing point for people to play the damage spec, the red line. And I think good in AoE, good in single target, just not quite the best in either. Anyway, they're definitely viable DPS, strong AoE DPS, and for me at least really fun DPS. The main thing with the Redline Warden is instead of seeing big numbers is you will see a lot of numbers. I know some people like seeing big numbers instead, so that could be a little preference for that. I don't mind seeing a lot of numbers or big numbers. It's kind of just whatever to me. But anyway, that's kind of what I think of all those three specs. Overall, you can probably see why Warden's my favorite now, but like I did say a couple times now, Rune Keeper can be my favorite sometimes if I'm more in the mood for burning stuff or whatever. And my Warden's also my best geared right now. I think that helps it being overall my top. And writing that Warden guide, I think also helped me learn the class more and see the enjoyment in it, and that was actually pretty fun. So yeah, it's an overall well-rounded class. The main things about it is the gambit system is a bit complex, which I like that. I know some people don't, but it's kind of simple once you get it down. Getting it down for me wasn't that hard because once I got it down once, I'd remember it pretty much. And then a big draw to the class is of course being able to solo a bunch of stuff easily compared to other classes, which I also have fun doing, as you might have seen in some of my other videos. So if I had to rate the Warden, I would probably give it a 9 out of 10 like the Rune Keeper, because it does have some annoyances like I said earlier, which I am getting to now. The main annoyance is skill lag. If you have lag with your gambit builders, that like completely messes up your rotation and your current gambit. It just affects wardens more than other classes, which of course it's always not good for other classes, but with a warden it's more noticeable and interrupts you more. But that would be the main thing I have against the warden, and the yellow line damage could be stronger. Those are probably the two main things. Alright, so that's what I think of those three classes, the Captain, Rune Keeper, and Warden. The Rune Keeper and Warden both got a 9, and the Captain got a 7, even though I did have Warden above Rune Keeper. So that'll be it for this video. If you have any thoughts on my top 3 or want to share your top 3, please comment that. I'd like to hear it and hear your thoughts on my top 3. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.